there are many people who perhaps are thinking that America could repeat the operation that it did in Venezuela to Russia or to Belarus or whatever. And when you think somebody can do something, that really changes your metrics and your thought process. I don't think anybody thinks that the Russians could do anything like this to the Americans or even to any Western countries or even to the Ukraine capital itself. So in that way, in a sort of game of chess or any other sort of game you can think of, American football, soccer, when you have the advantage, the sort of mental and psychological advantage can be 10 to 1 the physical. So at the moment, all that advantage appears to be with the Americans and the West and Ukraine, and not with the Russians.
Hamish, the Bretton-Gordon is a retired British Army colonel, former commander of NATO's and UK's chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear reaction troops. Welcome to our program, Colonel Hamish.
Thank you very much for having me.
US President Donald Trump announced on Saturday morning that US carried out military operation in Venezuela, and President Nicolás Maduro and his wife were captured and removed from the country. What is your assessment of this American military success in Venezuela, and what could this mean for Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping in China?
Well, this is a massive event that's happened over the weekend on so many different levels. I think if we first look at purely the military operation that was conducted by the US forces, extraordinary, and probably no other military in the world has nearly the capability to do it. If we just wind back to last year, when the Americans attacked the Iranian nuclear program and facilities in Iran and destroyed a number of sites with US aircraft that had flown all the way from the United States, US aircraft that had taken out air defense systems. All of these Russian air defense systems, by the way, conducted this operation without the Iranians or the Russians being able to lay a finger on them. What one was beginning, I think the world, or those people who don't study these things in depth, were suddenly realizing that actually the Americans and their Western allies, the sort of military technology and capability they have is way beyond anybody else in the world. And I would suggest way beyond China as well. Perhaps we'll come back to that. But when we look at the operation to arrest Maduro and his wife, this would have been many, many months in the planning, and also setting the conditions. It's very clear that a lot of US surveillance and intelligence assets were probably actually in Venezuela itself. There's a suggestion that they even had spies within Maduro's government. So building this intelligent picture is a key for any successful mission. But the amount of capability available to the Americans is phenomenal. So building up the operation with all that background, and then the massive US naval presence in the Caribbean and the waters off Venezuela, and the 150 or so US aircraft that took part in this operation. The British Air Force is about half that size, and this is only a tiny fraction of what the US has. And what I'm trying to show here is quite, why this is such an incredible operation and why it might send ripples around the world. But the actual conduct of the operation, by putting US Special Forces, Delta Force, which are very similar to our own British SAS, onto the ground and removing Maduro and his wife back to New York City in under 24 hours, is really the stuff of movies, the sort of Mission Impossible type films that actually the Americans have done. So I think on the face of it, this is an incredible operation. When we look at these sort of deep operations, certainly in the piece that I wrote in the Telegraph yesterday, I did liken Operation Spider's Web, where the Ukrainian special forces conducted the operation deep into Russia and destroyed a number of strategic jets. It's a similar type of operation on a much smaller scale, I might say, but the same techniques and ideas. So when we're talking about what sort of ripple effects does this have, again, in my piece in the Telegraph, I say every dictator and despot will be sitting slightly less comfortably in their chair this week than they did last week, because again, Maduro and the Venezuelans, although their air defense systems were Russian. In fact, the Venezuelans have spent billions of dollars recently buying Russian kit, and Putin has been trying to shore up the regime for some time. And again, a little bit like the Iranians, the Americans got in and out without, Russian equipment or capability being able to lay a hand on it. So I think in a way that is very, very significant. So a very important operation, a real marker. And I think it comes at such a time when we spoke only a few days ago about the peace deal, which President Zelensky had said was 90% ready. President Trump said it was 95% ready. And the inference was that the only thing missing was Putin to come to the table and to sign the deal, as it were. Now, the metrics after what happened in Venezuela and the mood music in Moscow, I should think, are very, very changed. So it could have a huge impact. It is really, I suppose, people are concerned, where is Trump going to look next? He seems to be focused on Greenland, which is, I think, a deep concern, because none of the Western allies are prepared to support him in his endeavors there. But we are all urging that he gets on the phone to the Kremlin to try and get this peace deal over the table as soon as possible.
Let's also cover this matter of Russian air defense systems in Venezuela didn't work well. According to the General Dan Kane, US Air Force has destroyed Venezuela's or Russia's air defense systems on the ground, and probably there were Russian air defense assets deployed on the ground provided to Venezuela by Russian government, and also Russia has invested so much in Venezuela, both militarily and economically. From your perspective, what does Vladimir Putin feel right now, and what could this mean for Russia's partnerships around the globe?
Well, I think if we take the first bit first, or the last bit first, is anybody going to spend their money on Russian air defense systems? We know we're talking about the S-300s and the latest ones, the S-400s and 500s, which are supposedly better, but there's no reason to think that they're going to be able to, stop American capabilities, F-35 A and B jets and other stealth jets. So I think we really got the feeling after the Iranian attack that Russian kit really isn't up to it. And I think one must consider in the background, again, we spoke about it often, the professional Russian military army was destroyed in the first year of the war. The Russian army is mainly conscripts now. Certainly the Russian military industry is turning out kit, but quite frankly, turning out air defense stuff that doesn't work, you might as well not bother to do it. And again, this is on the back. I mean, another nail in Putin's coffin over the last 24 hours has been Trump confirming that Ukraine did not attack Putin's palace with 89 or 91 drones, whichever person in Russia is talking about it, last weekend, which Putin has been using as his main reason to stall the peace process. So I think, the whole business around the world, if Russia is trying to get some foreign currency by selling air defense equipment and Russian equipment, then people are very clearly saying that it's probably better to spend your money on, it might be more expensive Western kit that will actually work. And I suppose the other really important thing to consider is the whole price of oil. It would appear that the main driver behind Putin lifting Maduro, quite apart from the drugs that he allegedly is getting into the US, is that President Trump wants control of Venezuela's oil, which is the biggest oil reserves in the world. Now, if Venezuelan oil starts coming onto the world market, the $40 price sort of that it is at the moment is going to drop further. And we know that the Russian war machine cannot operate at a price of $40 a barrel. So again, when I'm sure Putin's long-term planners are looking at this and going, first of all, it appears our kit is no good against Western kit, and we're running out of money really quickly. And a little bit like Iran, where there's been a lot of public protest in the last 9 days against the regime there. And again, Trump has threatened he will get involved militarily in Iran, which is a hugely significant act. Again, we know there's unrest in Russia at the moment. We know that Russian military equipment is pretty impervious against Western kit. You put all this together, and one would hope that that should be enough to get Putin to the table to agree the peace deal, because things are rapidly going against him in a whole raft of ways. And Trump, whatever we think, other things we think about him, he has demonstrated by the Venezuelan operation, that Operation Absolute Resolve, that he is prepared to do the sort of unthinkable when it comes to military operations.
You just mentioned about Russian oil. Just recently, Russian billionaire Oleg Deripaska said that if U.S. partners gain control of Venezuela's oil fields, they would control more than half of global oil reserves and could try to cap prices around $50 a barrel or at lower levels. From your perspective, should Vladimir Putin be concerned about this, both economically and militarily, because Russian army can do that? They tried to do something like this in February 2022, but they failed to do so. Vladimir Putin would like to also conduct such a short, special, so-called special military operation, capture President Zelensky, but he wouldn't be able to do so. He failed to do so, and now he sees this unprecedented military success of US in Venezuela.
Entirely. I mean, if we take the 2 points there, first of all, the oil, you're absolutely right. Yeah, US could control over close to 50% of the oil in the world. And if you think the US's other close ally, Saudi Arabia, also controls a huge amount, it leaves the Russians in a pretty precarious situation. And, their friends in Iran are not really going to help. But, the second point, as you point out, that, in the early stage of the war, we know that the Russians were trying to capture the Ukrainian president or kill him, and they failed. What has now been demonstrated to them is how you do it. And it is clear that the Russians just do not have that capability. Now, one's not suggesting that the Americans are going to go and lift President Putin, but they are far more likely to be able to do that, I expect, than the Russians either trying to capture President Zelensky or other Western leaders.
You just mentioned about this US ability to find and locate, capture anyone, anywhere around the globe. Let's cover President Zelensky's reaction to this surprise operation in Venezuela. So Zelensky said, quote, "If it is possible to deal with dictators like that, then the United States of America knows what to do next." What is your response to this?
Well, I don't think President Zelensky is suggesting that the Americans are going to do a similar operation on Moscow and to lift Putin. But I think the way I'm reading it is is very much as this is now Putin's opportunity to agree the US-Ukraine peace deal that's on the table, because it's an imperfect deal for Ukraine and it's an imperfect deal for Russia. But the way things are going at the moment, it's only going to get worse for Russia. So I'm assuming that what President Zelensky is saying is take your chances now, President Putin, because it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So this offer on the table that he is prepared to sign on behalf of the Ukraine people is the best that Russia's going to get. And again, everything that's happening at the moment is really, I think, putting a lot of pressure on the Kremlin. So, and the fact that the Russians have been slow to respond, or almost comically accusing President Trump of in getting involved in another state, and completely ignoring the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022 with absolutely no provocation or reason to do it. President Trump has said he's captured Maduro because of his narco trafficking and a whole host of other issues. Now, there is no possible reason that Putin can come up with for his invasion of Ukraine on that stage. So, yeah, let's hope that this is the Kremlin and Putin realizes that now is their best opportunity for a peace deal, and if they prevaricate any longer, that deal is going to become more and more in favor of Ukraine and less in favor of the Russians.
Let's also cover your recent article for The Telegraph about Putin and his problems inside Russia, with title Putin is about to be knocked off his perch when the internal propaganda collapses, regime soon could fall off. Could you please provide us with more details about these insightful articles, and how could this relate to current situation?
Well, I think it absolutely relates to the current situation. First of all, I discussed the peace deal that is on offer, which President Trump is pushing, and President Zelensky says that it's 90% agreed. When you look at it, I think I say in the article, this is not perfect for Ukraine. We absolutely accept that, but the deal is far from perfect. Well, from Putin's original ideas, his plan was to completely subjugate Ukraine. Now, the deal that he's got here is, first of all, the Donbass is turned into a non-military economic zone, and Russia is going to have to withdraw some forces. President Trump is also talking about Western boots on the ground, predominantly American, British, or predominantly British and French boots on the ground, which the British government seems to be agreeing to. And again, this seems to be, this in the past has been a red line for Putin. On a similar fashion, the whole idea of Ukraine joining NATO. And there is no question in the peace plan that Ukraine will join NATO, certainly not for 15 years. And the 15-year security guarantee is a NATO guarantee. And one assumes the Russians are looking at that as sort of joining NATO by stealth, however they want to put it. So actually, an awful lot of things are not going right. We then look at the internal issues. And I think when I talk about when propaganda falls down, the regime can fall as well. And really looking at the whole business around the alleged attack on Putin's palace, one of his many palaces, which are protected by the best Russian air defense system. I mean, it's rather important that Putin rather protects himself than his troops who are fighting on the ground. I mean, that's perhaps another issue. But all the propaganda coming from people like Lavrov and others that it was Ukraine attacking Putin's palaces is being proved to be an absolute fabrication. It was pretty obvious to all of us anyway, especially when Russian locals in the vicinity of Putin's palace were saying, well, we noticed nothing. If maybe we would have heard something if 90 drones had been shot down. And then the Russians produce a drone that sort of says "Made in Ukraine" on the side, written in Russian handwriting, sort of thing. It's. I think sometimes the Russian propaganda takes us for idiots, but people are now beginning to see that. So when you put all of that together, and then you throw on the Operation Absolute Resolve, the operation in Venezuela, you can see that but Putin's position may be getting a bit more tenuous, which is back to the last question, is why. Hopefully he is seeing that the deal on the table at the moment is the very best he can get, and he needs to agree to it pretty soon before Trump, looks to Eastern Europe. Now he is taking so many plaudits for his successful operation in Venezuela.
From your perspective, it could be difficult question to discuss, but what are the chances of similar operation of US against Putin's regime, maybe in another form or shape?
Well, I would be very surprised if the Americans directly got involved in something like this. One mustn't forget that, of course, President Trump is very materialistically driven. It would appear the main reason he has captured Maduro is so that he can get his hands on Venezuelan oil, rather than perhaps preventing more narcotics and drugs coming into the US. In a similar fashion, I think President Trump wants to see how much money he can make out of the conflict in what's happening in Russia and what's happening in Ukraine. So one has to be slightly circumspect about that. But I go back to one of my earlier points. When you look at some of the deep operations by the Ukrainian Secret Service, they appear to have the hallmarks of this type of operation. They appear to have huge amounts of intelligence, huge amounts of capability, and I'm sure that is down to the very brilliance of the Ukrainian Secret Service. But I expect there is also quite a lot of Western allies support, and no doubt quite a lot of US support as well. But with all, I think in these sort of high stakes negotiations and these sort of strategically important points, there are many people who perhaps are thinking that America could repeat the operation that it did in Venezuela to Russia or to Belarus or whatever. And when you think somebody can do something, that really changes your metrics and your thought process. I don't think anybody thinks that the Russians could do anything like this to the Americans, or even to any Western countries, or even to the Ukraine capital itself. So in that way, in a sort of game of chess or any other sort of game you can think of, American football, soccer, when you have the advantage, the sort of mental and psychological advantage can be 10 to 1 the physical. So at the moment, all that advantage appears to be with the Americans and the West and Ukraine, and not with the Russians.
And do you feel that this operation, this military success, can change or influence Putin's thinking right now, his calculus and his metrics in these negotiations?
Well, let us hope so. I mean, that is what we are all hoping. And, if one looked at it logically, absolutely it would, because Putin has, it's been shown to the world that Russian military equipment is really just not up to the task. Everybody is sort of knowing the state of the Russian military. Again, in the piece that I wrote of the weekend, everybody knows the Russians have lost over 1.5 million casualties in this conflict. So, I think what one is expecting that the Russians, Putin is not stupid. He may be a tyrant and an autocratic dictator, but hopefully is seeing that at the moment the peace offer on the table is the very best he can get. And if he turns that down, things could get a heck of a lot worse for him. So there's a lot of hope, I realise, in this, but there's quite a lot of really important, concrete things that have happened in the last few weeks and the last few days that make you think that maybe the tide is really turning against Putin. And if he's as clever as he likes to let everybody know that he is, then he'll come to that peace table sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Colonel Hamish, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and absolutely glory to Ukraine.